This episode of Wheat Pete's Word is brought to you by Syngenta and the stacked cereals lineup for your wheat. Looking to drive a more profitable winter wheat crop? Now is the time to think fungicide protection. It starts at T1 timing with a strong leaf disease management fungicide like Miravis Neo. Learn more at syngenta.ca.
Good day and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, April the 23rd. On this episode of The Word, it's happening. Plant 25 is full steam ahead. And then Agronomy Answers. We're going to talk about manganese, about other fertility, and at the end, about variable rate nitrogen on corn. Let's go! So I want to start with just a phenomenal quote. On Monday night's Agronomist, Andrew Kippen quoted this from Jeff Rich. I guess he's the originator. Think education is expensive? Try ignorance. I love that quote. You just got to think about it for a minute. But man, yeah, it costs money. As my good friend and neighbor Joe always says, costs money to go to school, costs money to learn how to farm. And that's another one that I just love. And yes, education is expensive, but it's really, really important. Hey, last week I talked about I am enough and the fact that words matter. Wow, just the amount of feedback I got about words matter. And by the way, I didn't say everything correct in that little dissertation that I had there, so I'm still learning. I appreciate all that incredible feedback. Matt sent me a great short podcast YouTube video from Brene Brown about empathy and sympathy. We'll link to it in the post, but wow, just you really got to stop and think about the words you use because the amount they matter is incredible. And yes, it is happening fast. I am not in Essex County, but we are getting reports that the wheat there is growth stage 30, maybe even pushing into 31. Winter barley definitely making headway here in this part, the London area. So if it's happening fast, that does mean you got to start making management decisions. By the way, flag leaf wheat in Delmarva, headed wheat out in Texas, getting closer to harvest. At Earlton, Jason sending me a picture of his wheat saying, Pete, when can I decide if it survived the winter or not? And in the picture, it's still under a little bit of snow or just barely coming out from underneath the snow. And Jason says, I tried to dig it out. It's still frozen in the ground. So a huge range in where the wheat crop is in right now. And that's just the way North America works. So whenever you listen to Wheat Pete and he's talking about his area in Ontario, please, please, please take it with a grain of salt because your area probably is just a little bit different. Meanwhile, it is happening, and wheat moves fast. Cereals in general move incredibly fast this time of year. So in the London region, we're basically to the point where if you're doing your nitrogen, your first application of nitrogen now, you might as well just do one application. And I get lots of questions about that every year, unless, of course, it's hard red winter. That's different. There we're after protein. We still want to split the nitrogen application there. But the data is incredibly clear that when we split nitrogen, the biggest benefit we get is that we reduce lodging potential. The challenge now is that you put that, if you decide to split on the 23rd of April, man, you put that first application on, you want the second application at least by second node stage. Remember, 50% of the nitrogen is in the wheat crop by the second node stage. So the second app has to go on that. We're only 200 growing degree days, and that we're getting 15 a day. That means in 2 weeks, you'll be at the stage where you got to head back out there and hit it with the second application. And unless it turns incredibly wet and warm, those are the conditions where we get loss. If we get that, then Pete will be wrong. But at this stage, in this area, not at Earlton, but in the London region, one application is, I think we just moved to that at this particular point. The other thing that I want to throw out there is as soon as you use one application, oh gosh, that means that we increase the lodging potential. And that means that you might, if it's a lodging-prone variety, you've had lodging problems before. Not every field needs a growth regulator, but if you have that issue, you hit that growth stage 30, 31. That is the ideal window to apply that growth regulator. That means there should be growth regulator going on wheat if you're going to apply basically now anywhere kind of down south of Ridgetown perhaps. And again, you have to look at your wheat and stage it. But gosh, that is pretty early to get that job done. Meanwhile, just a little bit more cool stuff before I get into more agronomy answers. Nebraska, 76% still in moderate to exceptional drought. Corey out of Idaho, he's on Twitter at Dust Farmer. I love following Corey. He's got really cool insight. He is seeding in Idaho into the dust, and there may be a little bit of moisture there, but they're incredibly dry. Meanwhile, there's still snow in the fence rows, so it's that time of year. Get it into the ground. In the UK, they have a real outbreak this year with gout fly in the wheat. We don't have gout fly that I'm aware of in North America. I reached out to Tracy Bowdy. She says, I don't think it's here. Don't think we've ever seen it. But it's really frustrating to wheat, Pete. Is that when environmental initiatives, political government initiatives get in the way of good agronomy, I just want to scream. So gout fly, 2 years ago, the fall of 2023, basically all the UK farmers seeded their wheat late because blackgrass, resistant blackgrass, is a huge issue. One of the management principles is that if you seed your wheat late, you can take the blackgrass out with tillage, and so you have less blackgrass pressure. They all decided to seed late, or many growers did. It turned wet. They only got 40% of their wheat in the ground. So the fall of 2024, everybody said, we're not doing that again. We have the 1 year memory. But I totally agree with planting wheat early. I think everybody knows that. So they seeded the wheat on time. Then they had a pretty good fall, and gout fly hit them in the fall. They could have sprayed last fall, but they chose not to because under the UK Sustainable Farming Incentive, if they sprayed with a pyrethroid to control the gout fly, then they would lose that incentive payment. And I'm all about the environment 100%. Like, we have to factor in the environment and all these things, but to take a significant yield hit because of that, it just, as an agronomist, I just shake my head. Hey, one other really cool thing, Dr. Dave doing it again. So I did, if you recall, I spoke at Dr. Dave's class. That was a ton of fun, to two of his classes. And in one of those classes, I talked about scouting wheat, and I talked about how many tillers one wheat plant could actually have. And I believe, I don't recall exactly, but I think I said that we had one wheat plant in a plot where the wheat seed must have jumped into the rabbit run, the guess row that we leave wide runs so that we know where the plots break. And that one wheat seed, it had, if I recall correctly, 78 heads. And so I said, how many tillers can it make? Well, it didn't. Not every tiller made a head. And I guess some of Dave's students kind of said, come on, how can one seed do that? Dave found one volunteer wheat seed that had germinated in his wheat from last year. It was growing there. He tried to count tillers. He lost count at 200 tillers. tillers from one seed. I'm not saying they'd all make heads, but yeah, wheat is an amazing plant. There's no doubt about that. As Jamie found out, where his wheat field, we had all this looked like volunteer grass coming. Turned out it was volunteer winter wheat. And those volunteer winter wheat plants make his planted wheat look pretty darn pale by comparison. Where they came from is actually, they probably lay dormant in his field for 2 years. That's hard to believe, but that's about the only answer we can come up with. Anyway, enough of that. I want to move on. I really stirred the pot last week when I just at the very end of the episode, I said, hey, manganese, Sebastian, 3 pounds, get 6 pounds. Wow, just a ton of feedback. So a little bit more on manganese. Michael saying, my agronomist suggested that I apply manganese. Can I just mix it in with my 28% and ammonium thiosulfate? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Manganese has to be foliar uptake. If you apply it to the soil, it gets tied up so fast that it's virtually useless. That means we have to paint the leaf, as my good friend Jonathan Zettler would say, excellent agronomist in Bruce and Huron counties. You have to paint that leaf with the manganese, in the 28% and ammonium thiosulfate. That's not going to work. So then Michael says, well, can I mix it with my herbicide, fungicide, plant growth regulator? Well, the answer there is probably not. It's a maybe, but probably not, because if we use dry manganese sulfate, 32% manganese, preferred source, it's the only source where we actually get enough manganese that it should at least do a long-term benefit. Man, that adding 8 pounds per acre of a dry manganese sulfate to a herbicide, fungicide, plant growth regulator mix, almost never do they play kindly together. So it just about has to be a separate pass. And Chad Anderson, great agronomist in Lambton County, just won't have it any other way with his growers, and he gets manganese deficiency on a regular basis. He says that's the way that you correct manganese deficiency, you get good results, and you don't mess up the other things that you do. Mark, farming out at Napanee along the north shore of Lake Erie, saying, but Pete, I just don't have the time. Fair enough. Then you use a different source of manganese, but you will pay more for the manganese and get less manganese. As long as you get response, that's okay. But the real answer is hit it with that 8 pounds. Now, the other thing that came up was, well, my soil test, and I forget, many different people sent me soil tests all over the map. Well, guess what? The soil test for manganese is highly unreliable. Yeah, sorry, we use it, but it's highly unreliable, and it's extremely related to pH, because the pH makes a big difference in how available the manganese is. So in Ontario, the official recommendation is a manganese index, and that index looks at the parts per million of manganese and the pH. Use those two numbers to calculate what your availability index should be, and that's all well and good, except that the manganese soil test is still highly unreliable. It's anywhere from 10 to 40% repeatable, if you will, so that's a bit suspect. Plus, the index over 25, we don't think you're at manganese risk. Under 15, we think you are manganese risk. There's this big gray area between 15 index and 25 index where it's kind of like, well, maybe. And then, of course, you get into soil type and muck soils and all those things. So it's highly unreliable. And Michael then said, well, or I actually asked Michael, I'm using Michael, by the way, as my test case if you didn't notice. Michael said, or I sent back to Michael, have you ever seen manganese deficiency in that field before? And Michael said, well, not that I know of, although I can't say I really looked for it. Yeah, man, if you had manganese deficiency in your soybeans, if you drove past that field at 50 miles an hour, you would know that you had manganese deficiency. If you have not seen manganese deficiency in that field before, don't apply manganese. Let the crop tell you. Once you have identified a field that goes manganese deficient, then I think you can use it as a proactive application, but only you apply when the soil is getting dry. Because here's the other fun fact about manganese. If the soil is wet, it's in a reduced form, less oxygen, it's very available. So even at low parts per million, you can still have lots of manganese. The soil dries out, more air in the soil, the manganese oxidizes. Guess what? It's not very available. So lots of things going on. The other thing to remember is that manganese does not move in the plant. So if you spray it proactively and the plant's not deficient, it can't take it in on those lower leaves and move it to the new leaves that are emerging. And so that there again, it's tough to do proactively. If you're manganese deficient and it's getting dry, you probably do have a manganese deficiency before you visually see many symptoms. We've seen that before, so you can see good yield response, but that's only where you see that manganese deficiency. Hey, I'm talking a lot about it, but it is really interesting because Ryan sent me the most interesting problem wheat field on his sand knolls. Man, but he had corn row syndrome. Just corn row syndrome right out, like just crazy. But when you tested it, you didn't really see a difference in the phosphorus levels in the tissue. And Ryan said, we saw manganese deficiency in that field in the fall. We didn't do anything to correct it. Bad decision, Ryan. Absolutely. You see deficiency, you correct it, because wheat will die from manganese deficiency over the winter if you don't correct it in the fall. But you come back and you say, why do we see good wheat over the corn rows from 2 years ago when all the starter the corn had was 5 gallons of a liquid fertilizer? I think it was a 624-6. Don't quote me on that. And I brought this up at the agribusiness meeting, and Brendan, good for him, he says, man, Peter, we've seen the same thing on our muck soils where, and again, it's after edibles. On the edibles, we have a little bit of a liquid starter fertilizer, not a lot, but it won't go manganese deficient where we have that higher phosphorus level. And so is that we get more root growth? I'm really anxious to hear what Dr. Dave fires back if he listens to this, because it is a head scratcher, but it's absolutely out there. And I just am convinced it relates to the manganese uptake of the plant. And the only thing I can think of is better root growth where we get into those higher phosphorus zones. Anyway, I want to move on. A reminder, if you are using ammonium thiosulfate on your corn crop and you're mixing it with your 28%, and so it's 28 plus ATS plus your herbicide, that is a problem waiting to happen. So be very, very cognizant that ATS, ammonium thiosulfate, does not mix really well with herbicides. And there's lots of times that we've seen that. You will likely see a little bit of scum on the surface of the tank. It's not that you can't do it. There's growers that have definitely done it. But add the ammonium thiosulfate last, mix well, get to the field, spray it out immediately. Don't leave it sit in the tank, and do the jar test first. Mike Cobra has some excellent data up on Field Crop News about that, but that's just a reminder. John saying, hey, Peter, what about a 2x2 starter on corn versus a broadcast fertilizer application on corn? Man, I'm not set up. John, corn is a great crop, can do amazing things, but it's a princess. And one of the things that Greg Stewart learned way back, I don't know, between 2000 and 2005, he had a bunch of projects. And after those projects, he had a mantra called death to broadcast phosphorus. You broadcast phosphorus on corn, it just doesn't have many surface feeder roots. It doesn't have a fine fibrous root system. And you've just basically, all you've done is maintained your soil test. From a corn response standpoint, broadcast phosphorus just doesn't give response. So 2x2 starter it is, there's no question about that. Adam asking, Peter, going to sell my wheat straw, yeehaw, going to buy back manure, want as much straw as I can get. What about potash for straw yield? Yeah, Adam, sorry about your luck. all of the data that Shane and I did, and Joanna Fallings, cereal specialist at the ministry, has repeated that data since she's become the specialist. Potash on winter wheat in Ontario is almost non-responsive. We get, in Shane and my data, we got 1.3 bushel per acre more yield. 1.3 bushel per acre more yield, and grain yield is a percentage of total biomass. Potash to build straw yield on wheat, it just isn't going to do very much. By the way, on spring wheat, it can be different. I was really interested in the planter setup agronomists on Monday night. They showed a picture from Western Canada where they looked at mid-row banding potash versus putting some potash closer to the seed. And man, like you could even see the canola windrows where the potash had leached out of the canola windrows. Tremendous difference in growth. Spring wheat different than winter wheat. We just don't see much impact on potash with winter wheat. Okay, I'm going to finish up here quickly with corn yields and variable rate nitrogen. An awesome article by Brad Carlson out of University of Minnesota. We'll link it in the post. Variable rate nitrogen on corn based on yield maps fails. Simply fails. And that's a really interesting outcome, and why we don't see a lot of variable rate nitrogen on corn, because where you get high corn yields, you have more organic matter, you get more mineralization, and higher corn yields need less nitrogen per bushel. That data is really, really clear and amazing. And what that means is where you get the high yields, you need less nitrogen per bushel, you get more nitrogen out of the area that it mineralizes, and most of the time we need higher nitrogen rates on the low yield areas than we do on the high yield areas. And like, it's totally counterintuitive. And when you look at the vast amount of data, the difference in terms of nitrogen management, the difference between a fixed rate at your maximum rate of return or your maximum economic rate of nitrogen on your corn crops, the difference between that and a flat rate, there isn't enough variability there. You might save yourself a few dollars, but it's a really hard thing to sort out. So that is a cool piece of information. All right, with that, I am out of time yet again. That's it. That's all on behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture. This is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, April the 23rd. Hey, it's a glorious day. I should be in the field. Hope you are. Get lots done. But don't forget, keep leaving Pete messages. See you next week.
Thank you for downloading this episode of Wheat Pete's Word, brought to you by Syngenta and the Stacked Cereals lineup. Growing winter wheat? Protect your yield with Miravis Neo fungicide with its long-lasting, powerful curative and preventative leaf disease management. Deal your wheat a winning hand with Miravis Neo for septorial leaf blotch, tan spot, and more. Talk to your retailer or visit syngenta.ca.